Welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Mikkel Thorpe, and this is the Expat Money Show. Today's guest is the founder, host, and producer of Lions of Liberty podcast. Over the last 8 years, Lions of Liberty has become the leading platform for libertarian voices in the alternative media. On a personal note, I am very excited about this interview because our guest is a dear, dear friend of mine. And I have actually had the pleasure of joining him on his podcast multiple times and even been able to assist him in his own expat journey. So please welcome to the show, Marc Clair. Marc, how are you?
Mikkel, man, it's great to be here. A little weird to be here as a formal guest since I've known you so long, and we've been having so many informal conversations. So
exactly, we must have been on the phone about 1 million times, and so now to actually be recording it, and from this side where I get to ask the questions and I get to put you on the spot for everything like that. Yes. So in traditional Expat Money Show format, what's your backstory? Tell me, how did you get into libertarianism? How did you get into podcasting? We'll save a lot of the expat things for maybe afterwards, but I'm kind of curious from the podcasting and libertarian side.
Sure. And there's like a 2-minute version, a 3-hour version. So I'll try to get somewhere closer to the 2-minute version on this one. But essentially it started for me with discovering Ron Paul, but I actually discovered Ron Paul before most people. Most people came to know who Ron Paul was through his 2007, 2008 electoral campaigns for president. And I actually first became familiar with him, not to age myself too much, but about a decade or so before that, I guess, and when I was in college. And a friend of mine in college, his name was Howie, and is Howie. He's still with us. But when he was in high school, he was actually a congressional page. It's basically an intern for congressmen. So he was a page for some Democratic congressman from Pennsylvania that I've never heard of. But he used to tell me these stories. We were good friends in college. We used to stay up late at night drinking. He would tell me stories about this congressman, this guy named Ron Paul, who was this Republican from Texas. And he would just go on these rants about this guy and how awesome he was and how he would go out of his way to go see his congressional floor speeches. And I was just thinking, this is so weird. This guy is so obsessed with this congressman, but whatever, I'll check out what he's doing. So I started to read his column at the time, which was called Texas Straight Talk. And what really stood out to me, I grew up kind of listening to talk radio in the car with my dad, because basically he either listened to doo-wop or AM political talk radio. So I got to hear this stuff all the time. And the impression that I got from politics was that there was Republicans and Democrats, and they argued with each other, and they were on the same teams, and they only went after each other. But when I started reading Ron Paul, what stood out to me was that he was almost exclusively, actually, at the time, because Republicans were mostly in power. This is around the George Bush era. He was almost exclusively going after Republicans. He was going after the war on drugs. He was going after the war on terror, the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, all of these policies that were associated with the Republican Party. And before I even understood, his base philosophy or anything like that, it just struck me as so different that, there is another way to view politics. There is another way to discuss this stuff, even if it's not that popular. You can actually just have principles and talk about everything through those principles and not care what team it's about. So that's just the first time I just started thinking about politics a little bit differently. I didn't necessarily become an overnight libertarian, but his style really rung true to me, and more so than even the philosophy that he was talking about, which I did find myself agreeing with. It was more just his tenacity and his truthfulness and his stoicism, that he was going to come out there and say whatever he felt was right, regardless of who it was going to upset, regardless of if it wasn't going to get him on a certain committee or what have you. And that really did impress me. So that kind of has always inspired me to really, in any way I talk about politics, I always use Ron Paul as sort of an inspiration of just the way he speaks about the ideas and the way that he doesn't waver from what he believes. He doesn't back down. When he was in the debates in 2008, he was literally being made fun of on stage by supposedly professional, unbiased moderators, and they would literally mock him and laugh at him. And instead of backing down, instead of being meek about it, he actually would just double down. When Rudy Giuliani asked him to apologize for even suggesting that the United States actions overseas could result in blowback and result in terrorism. He didn't just say, "Oh no, I'm very sorry, I misspoke there," as many politicians would. He actually doubled down and said, "No, this is obviously what is happening. The CIA admits this," and just continued to give his lectures in sort of his grandfatherly way. And it always just stood out to me that, especially at that time, I thought to myself, if this guy can get up there on stage and be practically embarrassed, and still just stand up for what he believes and be so bold in his messaging, well, maybe the least I can do is start talking about this stuff in my real life. Because at that point, I had an interest in politics in terms of the philosophy. I started reading all the libertarian books you're supposed to read, Murray Rothbard, Hayek, Mises, all that great stuff. But it was just like a hobby to me. It was just like an interest of mine. It wasn't something that had any effect on the real world. I didn't think any of these things were really going to happen. And it was really Ron Paul and his tenacity, his boldness that made me at least start talking about it with other people. So I started to talk about this stuff more with family and friends. And a couple of those friends are friends of mine from college, John Odermatt, Brian McWilliams being two of the main ones there. And the short version of the next few years is we ended up kind of developing an interest in these ideas together. We started a website, Lions of Liberty, because we all went to Penn State. Their mascot is the Nittany Lion, so that's where the Lions comes from. And it really just started off as kind of like a Ron Paul propaganda site, to be honest. We were just kind of writing articles about the campaign and things that were going on and our own commentary. But as that political end of things started to wind down, we started channeling that into more discussions about philosophy and that sort of thing. And at some point along the way, I had started listening to podcasts a lot. Whether I was working out, walking my dogs, doing some menial tasks, I was just consuming podcasts nonstop. And this might sound crazy to you, Mikhail, in 2021, but I really couldn't find libertarian podcasts. Like there were a couple guys like Robert Wenzel and Lou Rockwell who were doing interviews occasionally, and some of that was influential on me. Just to hear any interviews with libertarians that didn't even exist other than with those guys, as far as I knew. And there was like the Cato podcasts that were just kind of like more dry policy type stuff. Nothing that really interested me, and nothing that was consistent. I think that's the important thing, and it's one of the important things about podcasts, as we've discussed many times, is that consistency. And there was just no consistent libertarian interview podcast out there. So I just decided, okay, I guess I'll start it. And I talked to some friends who had another, non-political podcast, and I basically just copied their entire setup. And I think we all struggle with this, but I had major imposter syndrome when it came to starting my podcast. So I kept thinking to myself, like, I've never done this before. I've never talked on a microphone before. I've never done public speaking. Like this is very uncomfortable for me. I just felt it was something I should do. So I did put it off for a long time. Like I had the microphone just sitting in a box for a few months, and but I was still writing articles for the website. So I was looking to write an article about intellectual property. And, the guru of intellectual property in the libertarian world is a guy named Stephan Kinsella. So I dropped him an email, asked him a couple questions, and he responded like, this would be a lot easier if we just hopped on a Skype call and just talked about it. I was like, okay, video call, recording equipment, microphone. I have all these things. There's kind of no excuse not to just start this podcast right now with this interview. So I just said, would you mind if I make this the first episode of my podcast? I've never done this before. And he was like, sure, whatever. So that's what we did. We recorded that podcast, and thus the Lions of Liberty podcast was formed. And I guess the rest is sort of history. Eventually, John and Brian, they had been, big parts of forming the website, and I kind of nudged them a little bit, but I think they were probably going to do it eventually anyway, but to start their own podcast. And now we have basically 3 shows on what is not formerly called a Lions of Liberty network, but that's actually changing next year. We are actually going to formally sort of rebrand our show as an actual network, as opposed to just like a podcast that has 3 different shows, which will, it's going to give us a little more flexibility with some things. So that's pretty exciting.
So how was episode 1? I'm kind of curious on the breakdown of what that was like. Maybe I should go back and listen. Is episode 1 still up there on the internet? Is it or do we have to use like Wayback Machine to find it?
I'm a believer in just leaving everything up. I was definitely rough around the edges. My audio sucked. I edited it myself, so it's just a disaster because I had never done that before either. And yeah, it's not very good. Well, I don't know. Other people say it's good. I'm very hard on myself, so hearing it now is super cringe for me. But it's up there. You can go find it. It's if you just go find Lions of Liberty on your podcatcher and scroll all the way to the beginning, you will find.
Oh my God, that would be a lot of scrolling. How many episodes have you done now?
It would be. There's probably an easier way to get there than by scrolling. Yeah. Well, I've done as of this recording 543 episodes of my own, and then hero. John and Brian are each clocking around a couple hundred each. I think John actually just passed 300, and Brian is in the 200s somewhere. So over 1,000 between the 3 of us.
And just for everybody who's listening, that is monumental. That is an insane amount of episodes, unless you're someone like Tom Woods who does 5 days a week or something like that.
Yeah, he just passed 2,000. Funny story about Tom Woods though, because actually when I started my podcast, because I was the only libertarian podcast out there, I was like, great, I'm going to be the one who's there every week with the interviews. Like, maybe I won't be the best, but I will be the best because I'll be the only one. And then next day, I think I see an ad on Facebook for coming in October, the Tom Woods Show, 5 days a week. I'm like, okay, so maybe I won't be the only one. And maybe this guy who people already know, because I was nobody. No one's ever heard of me. But everybody in the libertarian world had heard of Tom Woods at this point. So obviously he had a bit of a leg up on me. And, Tom's awesome. He's actually someone I look up to quite a bit in this Liberty podcast world. So even though I technically started a month earlier than him, he has certainly been an inspiration, especially, you know how hard it can be to turn out an episode a week sometimes. So the fact that he has done 5 a week consistently is it's absolutely phenomenal. Yeah,
no doubt. A weekly show is a ridiculous amount of work. Like it is so much work, and the consistency. I've had a couple of times where I've had to take breaks for a few months because of other big projects I've taken on. Now I've committed for the last, I don't know what, year and a half, 2 years to doing no matter what, come hell or high water, I am getting an episode out. And I have had people cancel on me at the last possible second and still somehow juggled and found a way to get these episodes out there. But the fact that you've been doing it for 8 years with over 500 episodes, I am in complete awe. I think that's amazing.
Yes.
So after all of these hundreds and hundreds of episodes and interviewing the most influential people in the libertarian space, do you still call yourself a libertarian?
Oh, you're going right for the jugular on this one, man. Look, people just use words as they use them. So if someone's going to call me libertarian podcaster Marc Clair, I'm not going to just stop them and go on a rant and say like, no, I don't use that word. It's just, I think something that I've discovered in the past couple of years really is that just labels in general are really hindering to a lot of conversations. So, if we're talking about libertarian ethics, the non-aggression principle, Austrian economics, I agree with all of that stuff. I don't really find flaws in it ethically. I don't think it wholly describes everything we need to do in life or anything like that. I don't think it can be like your sole guide to what you do. But I certainly agree with it as a political philosophy. But I think that the labels just do hinder conversation because everybody has their own idea of what a libertarian is. My idea of what a libertarian is different than 100 other libertarians' ideas, let alone what the people that aren't libertarians or aren't anywhere in this realm think. They mostly just have like stereotype ideas. So, I'm not going to reject it from libertarians because I know what they're saying. I know they're not saying it derogatorily. I just don't go around waving a libertarian flag. And I'm for liberty. I'm for individual liberty. I'm for group liberty. I'm for people being able to pursue the greatest liberty in their own lives, whatever that might mean to them. So if that makes me a libertarian, I'm a libertarian. If that makes me something else to you, then that's fine too. I don't really care.
Well, from my side, I think it's really interesting because I would consider myself very libertarian in my values and my moral compass. I would consider myself very libertarian in my political philosophy and my economics and everything like this. And I would probably even come out and say that I'm a hardcore libertarian with a small L because I don't know anything about the Libertarian Party. I have not even had... Yeah, probably for the best. I have certainly read my share of libertarian books, but I don't obsessively read every single libertarian book that is ever published in human history. And I'm sure there's...
you were acting it out before it was even a philosophy to you. And I think that's interesting about your story is that, you discovered it because you were already living that way and then kind of found out there was a word people used for it.
Exactly. But more than that, I think that it's important to understand that this is a show that is based on freedom and liberty. So with all of the guests, all the people that have come on, there's this underlying theme of freedom without having to say, this is the Expat Money Libertarian Show. I think that just trying to encompass those same type of liberty values on a daily basis, I think is the important thing. But I guess it's really interesting for me because you have branded yours as a libertarian podcast. So the journey for you is probably quite different than it is for me. But after seeing so much and you seeing how the Libertarian Party just cannibalizes each other, they're monsters. Some of them, I swear to God, I just don't understand how that they would describe themselves in the same way that I think of describing myself. I'm just curious if it's like soured you at all.
As far as the party goes, my interest in the party was only ever from like a media coverage standpoint. I had people that reach out to me that were like, hey, I'm running for this or that. I really had never any interest in it prior to like 2015, 2016. And then I started to get to know people in the party and get to know them and like a lot of them. And I think the difference to me, like the way I look at the Libertarian Party now, as opposed to in probably 2016 to 2018, I was going to like libertarian conventions, hanging out with a lot of people in the party, hitting Bourbon Street with them afterwards, and had a blast. And like I think there's a lot of good people in the party. So I don't want to like, bash the people necessarily. Some of them deserve bashing. A lot of them actually.
Some of them
not
do.
The ones,
Some of them do. I'm not gonna name names by any means, but
plenty do.
Yeah.
But I came to see it as like, okay, I don't think this is a party that's going to affect anything. Because for better or worse, the United States is a two-party system structurally in how it is set up and how power works, and just the way it is, a Libertarian Party is not going to have a grand impact in any way. There's only been one Libertarian congressman, and he was elected as a Republican and switched right before he knew he was going to get taken out of office. As far as like political metrics, yeah, it's nothing. But at the time, that didn't matter to me too much, because to me, it was just more of a way to network with like-minded people. There's a political aspect to it, but I didn't care about that. So, it was just a way to network with people, and I saw it more as just an aspect of the hobby of being a libertarian. But I think over the last couple of years, I look at things a lot differently. I look at politics a lot differently, and it seems, to be frank, and I've talked about this on Libertarian podcasts before, so it seems a little silly to me in 2021, if you're trying to do something serious, considering the events of the last 2 years, considering we have, vaccine mandates and all these COVID restrictions, and it's only getting pushed further and further and further, it's hard for me to say you should look at politics as just a hobby at that point. I would say either you got to change your situation, perhaps including fleeing the country and moving somewhere else, or just making yourself more independent in some way. You should be doing that. Or if you're going to do politics, do real politics. Like get your hands dirty and do politics that's going to actually affect and change something. That's just my view. If other people feel more comfortable in the Mises Caucus and in the Libertarian Party and that kind of activism, and it works for them in some way, fine, go for it. But I do see a lot of people who are heavily invested in the political aspect of things, who see it as like their last bastion of hope. And meanwhile, some of those people say, well, I can't pay rent next week, or I have to comply with a vaccine mandate. Well, then those people, I will say, you are prioritizing your time wrong then. Because if you can't feed your family for the next 6 months, if you lose your job tomorrow, then you shouldn't be involved in politics. You probably shouldn't be involved in politics, even if you can do that. But if you can't, you definitely shouldn't, as far as I'm concerned. Because besides just the fact that it's a bad use of your time, who wants to follow someone who isn't leading themselves? Who wants to follow someone who can't lead their own lives and lead their own family? No one. Absolutely no one. And I think there's a lot of people in that situation that might want to reassess the world around them and say, like, maybe I don't need to spend 10 or 20 hours a week in this third party that's probably not going to have any impact politically. That's just my view, though. Some people don't like when I talk about this stuff, but
No, I love it. I think it's brilliant, and I'm gonna poke the bear and try to get all of this out of you.
Poke away. There's plenty in here.
Okay, so that's a good segue. Personally, I believe that the vehicle of expat living, of expat life, is it is a vehicle for picking up freedom and liberty where politics left off, because I don't see that this is going to get any better back home. And I don't think that us spending all of our time working on politics is going to help. I think that it's too far gone. What do you think?
Well, people call me Blackpill sometimes because I kind of agree with you here. Like I don't think that. I think what we're dealing with right now, and what a lot of people are not grasping, some people might think this is just the latest political issue and it'll just pass. And that is just not how I see things. I think if you look at the patterns of human history, I mean, there's a couple combinations of things going on right now. I mean, there's a mass hysteria. That is what COVID is. And that is not me saying that it's not a real virus or not a real disease or that people aren't really dying. That's my disclaimer to saying, yes, it is a mass hysteria. The reaction to it is a mass hysteria. It does not match the reality of the disease whatsoever. So in that sense, it is a mass hysteria. And when you take a mass hysteria and you add modern social media and modern technology and modern forms of communication, which was already becoming a real issue in our society, especially in the US, you've seen so much inflammatory and violence around politics. And I think social media and the way it is literally designed to inflame and to get reactions and that sort of thing, I think it's just the perfect storm of a disaster here. And what I see around me is like a lot of people are changed permanently. I hope it's not permanent, but I've seen people between Trump to COVID literally completely turn into, hate to say it, demons. Like a lot of people have turned into effing demons, man. Like, I use that phrase somewhat mockingly, but not really, because if demons were real, would you be able to tell the difference between the way a lot of people act, between their reactions to how things are going right now? I really do see this as a major problem, and not one that can be changed by even if all the COVID restrictions go away tomorrow. We're still going to have problems because this is ingrained in a lot of people's worldview now. A lot of people just believe if you are not masking, social distancing, stabbing yourself every 3 months, then you are killing people. And when people hold that belief so strongly, I mean, what do you do to people that kill people? You stop them. You put them in jail. So if that's how they see the anti-vax or whatever kind of people they want to label as, what's the logical step of what's going to come next? And I don't want to be a Debbie Downer here, but I also don't want to, just live in this world of the white pills where we have technology and everything's great. Well, the technology is also what's being used to enslave us in many ways too. And I think we are in many ways on the verge of a digital genocide. Digital genocide, not in the fact that maybe they won't come to your house and shoot you, but do they have to if they can turn off your bank account and, stop you from going to the supermarket, and they switch to a CBDC of some kind, and then they can just turn off your money like that. That is where things are going. And this is not a conspiracy theory. There's plenty, they openly say this is where we're going with things. They write books about it and have podcasts about it. So I'm not making this up. I'm just reporting what they're saying they're doing and watching it unfold. It's hard to think that this is just going to blow over in a year or two when not only are these plans being put in place, but a lot of people are not just accepting them, but becoming advocates of them. The foot soldiers are kind of coming into place, and they're all around us.
Well, a lot of people seem to think that, when things go back to normal, then I will do A, B, C, D, F, G.
Yeah, then I'll take that trip.
Yeah, it's like, even if, as you had said, everything opened back up tomorrow, all the restrictions, all of these types of things, I think that the psychological damage that is done to these people is so intense that it will stay with us for a generation or more. Even just think about the children and what is happening to kids right now. Seeing this type of behavior, like I've seen, we went to a birthday party with my daughter, got invited to a birthday party. We went over there. The birthday boy was having a bite of his cake, and in between bites, putting his mask back on. Like, lift mask, cake in mouth, close mask.
It's inhuman.
And it's like, you're like 7 years old. Like, how you actually are so terrified that the parents have indoctrinated him, or the school system, or whomever it is, into thinking that this invisible virus is going to kill him if he doesn't pull down his mask in like 1/2 of 1 second is so messed up.
It would be comical if it wasn't so frightening. And like,
True.
What do you think kids like that are going to be like when they grow up? That's what frightens me. That's what
Exactly. The psychological damage that is done to society right now, I think we will be feeling for decades to come. Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about some of the reasons that you have left the United States, because you are now an expat yourself.
I suppose it all depends on how you define these things, but at least for the moment, I have been in Mexico for almost 3 months now. Where do you want me to start? Do you want me to go all the way back?
Let's do it all. Let's do it all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, if we really want to start, go all the way back. We can go to like my interest in just travel and like being overseas, because I was actually one of these people who, in my 20s, I really thought, because I didn't make a ton of money, when I was in my early 20s, like a lot of people just getting out of college. And I really thought like, I was one of these like, I want to travel someday, people. Someday when I have the money. Because I really thought in my mind that I had to have a lot of money to travel. And somewhere along the way, I started like doing some research, and I had met a couple people that traveled, and I was like, oh my God, how'd you afford that? They're like, I just saved up the money, and then I took a month off, and I'm like, when I found out, like I talked to people like, oh no, you can stay at hostels, you can eat cheaply, you can buy, like there's ways to travel very cheaply, like so, and that made me like, okay, well I could save up like a couple grand. I thought I had to have like $100,000 to travel and see the world. So when I started to change my mindset and set little goals, so like, well, not a little goal, because actually my first big trip overseas after like kind of having that revelation was I spent 5 weeks back backpacking through Central America. So I guess I dove in a little deep, but I was 30 years old. I mean, that was the first time I had really traveled. I'd been outside the country. I'd been to Canada. I'd been to Mexico. I did a semester living in Manchester, England. So it's not like I never left the country, but it wasn't like I didn't care. Like I wasn't like passionate about seeing other cultures. And but that trip really opened my eyes, man, in so many ways. Like just meeting people and talking to people in my very shitty Spanish, which some would argue is still shitty, but it was a lot shittier then. I know I knew maybe 4 words at the time, but you've been in those situations where you think you don't speak the language and the other guy doesn't, and next thing you know, it's 4 a.m. and somehow you're basically understanding everything each other are talking about, or at least you think you do, one or the other. So I had a lot of experiences that just meeting people from completely different cultures, not just locals, in like Guatemala, Nicaragua. I absolutely loved being in those countries and meeting the local people there, but also you meet other travelers. So I met people from Australia, from Israel, from Europe, and what amazed me by all of them, first of all, they're all 19 or 18 or whatever, and they had already traveled for a couple of years, a lot of them. And I was like, man, I missed, not like I missed out, like it's too late or anything, but just like, wow, this is, in other parts of the world, they have a totally different mindset about travel. I don't know what it is about the United States where it's just not emphasized. It's just like, we're the best country. Why would you even need to go somewhere else? There's a lot of weird stuff going on in the world. Like it's really just not emphasized or pushed in any way, shape, or form. But that trip really changed my entire perspective on traveling. And I think from that moment, I always had the desire to at least like travel more and maybe even live in other countries eventually. So that's been brewing in me for the last decade or so. And I've done a decent amount of traveling since then, but I always did have to return and to work. And eventually I ended up with a full-time job for almost the last 5 years. So that obviously hindered how much I could travel because you can only get 2 or 3 weeks off maximum. And that was really grinding on me too, because I had been so used to traveling a lot before that. And, it's like the golden handcuffs thing. It's like, I've got a great salary. I've got a great, great insurance, great benefits, all this stuff on paper that you would, just kill to have. But it wasn't satisfying to me, and it was crushing my soul slowly, especially as I found myself unable to travel more and more just because of the time. But eventually, just to get to where we are now a little quicker, in 2019 or so, I had not been traveling in a while, and I just decided like I'm taking a trip by myself. I didn't decide by myself. Like I asked a few friends, like, hey, do you want to go somewhere, like go on a trip? And at this point, at this age that I was then, I was like 39 at the time. By that point, most of my friends that I had maybe traveled with before or would just go on crazy adventures with on the fly to Las Vegas or something, most of those were married or had kids and just weren't going to take off on a trip with old Marc Clair anymore. So I was like, all right, well, I'm just going to go on a trip by myself, which I had done before. I actually spent about a month in Mexico by myself in like 2010 and spent a week in Cuba. So I had traveled myself a little bit. It was actually one of the most rewarding experiences traveling by myself, because then you're really forced to get out of the box. You're really forced to, talk to other people because you don't have anybody else at that point. So that was a tremendously growing experience for me too. But yeah, so I decided I was going to take a trip to Mexico City, because even though I'd been throughout Mexico, I'd never been to Mexico City, which I'd heard so many great things about. It's just, a really fun international city. And that's to me, it was like, okay, that's a trip I can just go do. It's a 4-hour flight from Los Angeles. I can just go do a week here and, no big deal. So I was going to take the trip later in the year, but then we suddenly got this like random week off at work in July. And I was like, it was like 2 weeks ahead of time notice. And I was like, well, they're paying me just an extra week off. It was basically an extra week of vacation out of the blue. So I was like, well, why don't I just move this idea up and just go right now? So I just booked a ticket to Mexico City. And, so I kind of just got to Mexico City. I spent 4 or 5 days just spending alone time. It's funny how you can spend alone time in a city of 25 million people or something. But I spent my days exploring the city, talking to some people here and there in bars at night, but never really super connecting with anybody. I was just there I was there more to just kind of unwind and see another city, and not necessarily there to meet people. But as these things tend to happen, and towards the end of the week, I got a little bored by myself. So I will confess. My wife might not like it. I did confess. I did open the Tinder app and do a little bit of the swiping, as the kids say. So I did connect with a lovely young woman there, and we decided to just meet up. And I'll give you the short version of the story. We really, really hit it off. That's the really short version of the story.
You guys met on Tinder? I didn't know that.
We did, yes. Yes. Our official story was we met at the aquarium. I don't know how much better that is, because I was actually going to go to an aquarium that day for no reason. I've been walking the city for 5 days straight, and I was just kind of sick of walking, and I found this aquarium. So I was actually texting with her while I was in line for the aquarium, and she's like, "Oh, hey, do you want to go hang out later and go to the park and like get a drink or something?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." As soon as I finish the aquarium, and as soon as I said that, I was like, I just turned down a beautiful woman and said, after I finished the aquarium, what's wrong with me? So then I was like, actually, no, I'm good. I'm free right now. So we ended up meeting up, and the short version, the non-scandalous version, is that our Friday night date turned into a 5-day date. So we were basically inseparable for the next 5 days. And sometime before I left, this actually took place at Teotihuacan, the just incredible pyramids not too far outside Mexico City. I expressed my feelings to her, so to speak, and they were immediately returned. And I'm not kidding you, like, when at this moment, I'm just going to give you the whole tale, I guess. At this moment, this is not a joke. We were on top of the Pyramid of the Sun in Teotihuacan, and we kissed and embraced. And as we did this really happened, Mikhail. Butterflies started flying around our head. I swear this happened. And so I was like, well, okay, I guess this is maybe a sign or something. But when I made that decision, I knew that I was taking a big risk there. And because I knew this is someone, I didn't really know all the details, but I knew she was Mexican and I knew I was American. I knew that at worst case, talk about a long distance relationship. I mean, crossing borders. I mean, that's like crazy. I would never have thought to even entertain the idea, to be honest. But I had met Diane before, so that was a different story. So yeah, needless to say, we were seeing each other for a while, and we were kind of making it work, going back and forth. She was luckily able to get a tourist visa very easily because she had one like twice previously, so it was basically just a renewal when she went in to get it. For most Mexicans, it's hard, like really hard, like almost impossible actually. So like when she was in line, like waiting, for her appointment, like 6 people in front of her all left crying and angry because they were all denied. Like it's very, very difficult to get even a visa to just visit the U.S. from a lot of countries, most countries, as you know. But yeah, she got that, and we kind of spent the next year or so kind of seeing each other as best as we can, kind of going back and forth. And then we actually got to this point in time where it was like I think it was like April 2020 that was coming up, and this is like earlier in the year. We're like, man, I don't know. Like I had a bunch of work in April, she had a bunch of work here in Mexico, and we were just like, I don't know how we're going to even see each other this month. So we're like, well, I guess April, we just won't see each other that month. I guess it is what it is. And then next thing you know, suddenly we don't have any work to worry about because this COVID thing came and I was furloughed from my job. All her productions were canceled. Sounds terrible, but it's kind of what we were asking for in a roundabout, in like a Twilight Zone kind of way. We're like, man, if only we could find a way to spend this time together. So we spent the entire month of April together, actually. We spent the next 3 months together in Mexico in a small town called Xochitepec, which is about an hour and a half outside Mexico City. She has like friends and family in the area, so we rented a house from a friend of a friend. And I mean, for a third of the price of the shitty little apartment I had in Los Angeles, we had a huge house with 4 bedrooms with a pool, and eating good food. I lost 30 pounds in those 3 months, not trying to do anything in particular, but I was living in a really hot place. It's really hot in that part of the country, and just eating fresh food, exercising more, swimming every day because we had the pool. So I mean, it was just, and I was just so much happier and healthier, and it really drove home for me how much the lifestyle I had been living was just not the right one for me. It was going to drive me to the grave. I mean, we're all going to go there eventually, but it was going to drive me earlier, I felt. So at that point is when I started really thinking, we got to get more to this kind of life, wherever it may be. Like, this is more the life. Obviously, I need to work too in some capacity because we didn't really do anything for those 3 months except spend time together. But it was time together we really needed. So yeah, I mean, and then shortly after that, I proposed, and here we are. We ended up, we were planning to get married, like a year and a half or so later. But when we started looking into things and talking to a lawyer and really starting to understand the immigration laws, like she was actually in the U.S. with me at the time on her visa, and we started looking at things, and she was supposed to go home like a week later. And it's really complicated, immigration to the U.S. But you can get married in the U.S. if you're on a tourist visa, as long as you did not come with that intention, which we did not. She was already there. So we just decided, you know what, because this was a long process. Like for her to get a green card, basically we're just looking for normalcy. We wanted to be able to travel freely and not worry, because even when you're on a tourist visa, if you have too many entries and exits, they'll start asking questions. Like the time before that, they had asked her something about like, oh, why are you coming in and out so much? And you don't want to lie to immigration ever. And she told the truth, like, oh, I'm just coming to see my boyfriend. And that was fine. But you do that enough, eventually they're going to inquire, like, are you living here? And it's just but an extra layer of stress we didn't want to have. So we just decided to start that process as soon as we could. So we did kind of a turbo marriage in Vegas to start the immigration process going. So she did eventually end up getting a green card. The really hard part was that she couldn't come back to Mexico that entire time, which turned into 8.5 months. Our lawyer guaranteed us it wouldn't be more than 3 or 4. Guarantee. So don't listen to lawyers necessarily. I'm sure there's good ones. Good ones. This was not a good one, but I'm not going to go too much into that. But the truth is about when it comes to immigration, you're just choosing, especially through marriage and stuff like that, you're just picking from a series of bad options. If you're already in the U.S. when you get married and you're not allowed to leave during the green card process, so that's one bad option, especially if you have family here like she does. That was really difficult for her. And then the other way, though, if you get married outside of the United States, then you have to wait for this process to take place. And it's a lot longer process to do it outside the United States. And then it's questionable whether or not you should really travel on your tourist visa while you're in the process of converting to immigration. Some lawyers say, sure, it's fine. Other lawyers say, well, there's a good chance they'll kick you out. And if something gets messed up in that process, it's over. The whole thing's over. So it's a series of difficult decisions that you have to navigate. So that's what we were really just going through that whole time. But yeah, she did get that. And then, a couple months ago, it was just for various reasons, I left my job. And, we've been talking for a while. Like originally we were just going to first move to Mexico. Then we were starting to look at Florida. And really the point is we want to have the freedom to go wherever we can go together. The three of us, because she has a son as well, who we have custody of now. So this is the only country where the three of us can be together. Well, that's not true. He has a passport, so he can go to other countries, a lot of other countries actually, but he can't go to the United States. Even though he's my stepson, even though she's a green card holder, he's still in the process. And you'd like to think with a kid it would just be like that, but it's not. So that's where we are right now. We're just kind of waiting for that, waiting to have the ability to go somewhere in the U.S., to go somewhere else, to really do whatever we want to do. But you can pick away at whatever you want from there.
No, it's really interesting for me because I've been kind of by your side. We've been talking every week as you've been going through this process. Before we were friends, well, you were single, Marc, and then you disappeared for a little bit, and I was like, what the hell is Marc doing? And then it's like, oh, a new girl entered. And so I've been kind of following along through our conversations, but I've never actually had it laid out for me, the entire thing. And I did not know that you met on Tinder. So that's pretty crazy.
We don't usually talk about that part too much, but whatever.
Well, I'm sure I won't tell anybody else, just be between you and I.
Just a couple thousand people.
Yeah, just several thousand people. Exactly. Okay. So I guess give me some insights from your side. I certainly have from my side, but I'm interested from your side. What has it been like dating and then marrying someone who comes from a different country, a different culture, a different language? What has your experience been like with that?
Well, my wife speaks really good English, like very fluent English. So that was good just from the bat that she was essentially fluent and we had no problem communicating, from the get-go. So obviously that's a hurdle that other people might have more of a difficult hurdle with, depending on where they meet someone and what everyone's language level is. So that wasn't the challenge. Although the challenging part is, we only speak to each other in English. So I'm trying to get better with my Spanish and I have to kind of use other resources because it's just easier. If she wants to tell me something, she can spend 10 minutes dissecting a couple more words that I don't know in Spanish, or she can just tell me the thing. So it's like that's usually what happens in reality. But yeah, it's as far as I don't know. I think you get to really see a lot of the cultural differences spending more time in a country than if you were just, showing up for a vacation or something and just partying the whole time. You really get to understand the culture a little bit better. And I really love the culture of Mexico. I don't love everything about Mexico City. A lot of masks here. I'm not a fan of that, but I love the people. And this is something consistent about almost everywhere in Mexico. You've heard the phrase "mi casa es tu casa," and it's so true. You really are treated not just by my wife's family, who's completely, embraced me. This gringo shows up out of nowhere, so just swipes their daughter away. But they've been nothing but just amazing, just embracing me. That's true of people I barely know. That's true of people I meet on the street. You feel a certain sense of warmth here that you really don't necessarily get everywhere in the United States. Now, maybe it's a little more of a stark contrast for me because I come from, Los Angeles, the land of soulless people. So, maybe that stands out a little more to me because maybe I just forgot what it was like to walk around the street and see people smile at you, especially when the last year and a half in Los Angeles, whenever I walk down the street, everyone's got a fucking mask on, pardon my French, but the mask thing gets me fired up. So yeah, I mean, and that is a thing here, but it is different here in Mexico City. Yes, there are masks everywhere. And no, I don't love that. But there's no Karens. Like, there's not no one's angry at me for not wearing a mask. No one's going to scream at me. It's just what a lot of people do. And I think a large part of that is maybe just I don't know exactly why, to be honest. I think a large part of it is a culture of respect, and it's maybe seen as respectful to other people. So people just do it, even if they're walking their dog alone or exercising in the park alone or whatever. I don't know. It's my least favorite part about the specific city I live in, for sure. But the cultural warmth is still there. Even within that, it's just a very different feeling. And I think you get to by actually being part of a family in a different country, you really get to learn, see those differences and similarities, I guess, both when you're really on the ground, really living, not just visiting. Because even for the first year and a half when I come here, we're still kind of in party mode whenever I come because we're only going to be seeing each other for X amount of days. So we're just kind of going out and having fun and not really getting that immersed in the culture necessarily. So it's definitely a difference when you're actually, at least when you move from dating to being married and actually everyone meets each other's families and everything. So yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I can say it's definitely different than if you were with someone in the same country. Because there's challenges there. There's no way around it. But it's absolutely worth it because the day I made that decision to sort of express my feelings, I knew there were many challenges ahead, and I just fully embraced them. I said, that's okay. Whatever they are, I don't know what they all are, but I'm going to roll with them because this just feels like the right thing to do. So yeah, it's worked out so far.
So the different dynamics because of language, I think, are always very interesting. I mean, yes, as you said, she speaks very good English, and I've been on the phone and we've, all hung out and had beers together and stuff online. But still, English is a second language. I know in my marriage, I've had to be very sensitive in the way that I speak and the words.
We can still have misunderstandings, because just certain phrases or words, or I might say something that's a joke and then it doesn't translate quite that way. And then it's I think you totally misunderstood what I was saying there. And then, eventually we got to figure that out.
I think that the things are always on a slightly different footing as well. When the person that you're with is speaking your language, I mean, your quote unquote, of course, but I mean, they're speaking it as a secondary language. So I think that there has to be a certain amount of extra sensitivity from you to make them feel more comfortable and understand. And I've gotten frustrated before because I'm trying to express something and my wife doesn't understand, but actually that's my fault. That's not her fault. I have to take personal responsibility for that. Have you ever had situations like this where it's you have to kind of remind yourself the extra steps and the extra things that are being done and how this dynamic is in the relationship?
For sure, especially because her English is so good that I can forget that it's the second language. That's the thing. It would almost be easier if it wasn't that great. Then I would always have reminders, but I just forget because she is so fluent, essentially. But even like you said, when you're fluent, it still is a second language. So it's always going to be not your first language. So there are certain things you won't even she'll be like, oh, so what is that word for that? Or she'll say a word slightly differently, and that's when I have little reminders. They're like, oh yeah, this is not her first thing. Just because she's so good at it, it's not, there might be little misunderstandings here and there. So yeah, there are things like that for sure. Or there's also misunderstandings the other way where I'm trying to do my best and I'm trying to, when she has friends over, they'll start talking and be like, oh no, we should speak English because a lot of their friends know English too. And I'm like, no, please speak Spanish. But sometimes, I'll think I know what they're talking about and I'll kind of be right, but there's just some key aspect that I missed. And then I'll jump in and be like, oh yeah, there was that one time that we did this. And she's like, yeah, I was just talking about that. I was like, oh yeah, I knew we were on the right subject, but I'm not, because fast, I'm good with conversational Spanish. I can go out, talk to the taxi driver, talk to people at the store. I don't feel uncomfortable at all. But yeah, when it's my wife and her friends all talking and they're not even, they're just blazing away. Then it's I'm picking up a lot of the words. So I kind of know what's going on, but maybe I'm missing some things. And then, when I try to show my Spanish and comment, then that's when I realize, oh yeah, I missed a lot of it. So
group conversations are notoriously difficult anyways, because there's a certain amount of dynamic, especially when people have known each other for an extended period of time. There's going to be mannerisms and colloquialisms that even if you studied the second language, it's going to be very hard to follow along. I mean, sure. I know exactly what you're talking about with Spanish. My Spanish is pretty darn good right now. I can get by just fine, and I can have conversations, but it's so different having conversations like one-on-one, face-to-face with someone, or being out at a restaurant or a bar with 5 or 6 people and the music's going and having a group conversation about whatever the topic may be. It's so easy to, miss a couple of words and then miss a couple more, and it becomes this cumulative effect where at the end I'm like, right. I just kind of start tuning out at some point. Yeah.
If you miss one word, you're fine. But then once you realize you missed 6 and you're still thinking about the second one, you're like, wait, I just lost the whole thing.
Exactly. What about from you entering Mexico City and being around her family and friends and people that she's known forever? Have you found it difficult to step into her life opposed to, going to a new location where both of you don't know anyone? Okay, yes, maybe it's her country and it's in Spanish, but then maybe you guys are on a slightly different or slightly more similar footing. What has it been like going to a country, to the place that she was born in?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, I wasn't born in Los Angeles, but I lived there for almost 20 years. So we kind of just switched roles because she was stuck in the US for 8 months. And so she was kind of in my life, and especially too, because I was going to work full time then. She was had a lot of spent a lot of time for herself. And she knew, obviously we met friends of mine and she met their wives, but they're not really friends. They're just kind of people she met. So that was really, very difficult, very challenging for her. So now the roles are kind of reversed. I'm happy. I love being here. And to me, it's not that hard because I'm a little bit of an introvert anyway. So I go into my office and I do my alone stuff and whatever, but I really enjoy, going, her, like I said, her family just totally embraced me, and they actually threw, just cause I mentioned oh yeah, I'd love to have a Thanksgiving turkey. So they went out and made me a Thanksgiving meal on Thanksgiving and got a turkey, and my wife made stuffing, which she never even had before. They just totally made me feel as at home as possible. And I stuffed myself just like Thanksgivings of old. So, whenever I hang out with her friends, we all, get along. Like I said, sometimes I fall behind on the conversation, but no, for me, it's been, I don't want to say easy, but kind of easy. I think the hardest part is just the language still, and just feeling like at some point I can get lost if it's all in Spanish, but I don't want to be like, hey, switch to English, because I want to be lost. I want to get lost so I can, find my way out, because that's just part of the process. So I don't want to be babied with it. I got to just, keep tossing myself in the fire. But yeah, to me, the transition's been awesome. I've only been here a couple months, and who knows where things take us. But, I've always felt, honestly, every time I visited Mexico, I've felt very much at home here. It just feels like it's just a warm, literally, with the weather and also just with the people place. So to me, it's just like a place I wanted to be already. So I don't know how long we'll stay in the city specifically. If we're going to be here much longer, we might go to a more beach centric location. Although the problem there is any of the beach towns, it's really hard to get good internet. And obviously I need good internet if I'm going to be podcasting and all that stuff. So that's just one of the biggest challenges. There's a lot of challenges actually. I like culturally, I love it, but there's certain things like dealing with the government. Yes, the government sucks everywhere and it's always annoying. Here, it's on steroids. It's imagine the government if they just made no money and really didn't care about their job, and there are also no consequences if they don't do their job well. You can be, we have been trying to just do something so simple so I can get my temporary residency here, which will turn into a permanent residency. Should be very easy through marriage, but just finding out the right documents we need and finding out what office to go to and calling places. And people hang up on you all the time. Private companies too, as much as we libertarians like to be like, oh, private companies, bro. And I agree, they're better than the government. But here, the private companies kind of suck too. My wife spent a week on the phone with Telmex trying to get better internet, about a year and a half ago. And then it's been another drama with them here. And it's just and they will literally, that's one good thing about the US is they have stellar customer service. You can just keep talking. No one's going to hang up on you. You can eventually get to a manager and you're probably going to get your money back or a free thing. And I'm the king of this. I never give up on the phone with the customer service. I always get my money back or whatever, even if it takes me hours. That doesn't work here.
Good use of your time, entrepreneurial Marc. My goodness.
Yeah, sometimes. But yeah, there's customer service is abysmal here. It's really bad. They will literally just hang up on you if you're too much trouble. And it's happened so many times to my wife trying to deal with the internet companies. So little stuff like that. It's annoying, but it's, to me, I don't know, there's charm in it too, because I'm still sort of new to being here all the time. And I just think it's kind of funny still. My wife does not think it's funny because she grew up here and she's been dealing with this her whole life. So it's not in no way novel to her. To me, it's the poor communication and the lack of people giving a shit about their own jobs or their job for the government or the private company. I just find it sort of oddly charming, even if it leads to a lot of frustration, but I'm weird.
I think that is not just Mexico. Actually, many places that I've been in the world, it is extraordinarily frustrating.
It might be more the U.S. that is the oddball in terms of how like we're all like be on time and do this and then treat everybody with customer service is number one. I think that's more the rarity.
Yeah. Ooh. Showing up on time, I think, is just so challenging down in this part of the world. I'm not exactly sure why. I don't know. It's like I'll be there at Tuesday at 10 a.m. They'll be there on Tuesday. Might not be 10 a.m. It'll probably be like 2 Tuesdays from now. It'll be completely the wrong week, and it won't be 10 a.m. It'll be like 10 p.m. or something like that. Like everything is completely wrong.
Yeah, it is very much a cultural thing. And I've had my wife try to explain it to me. And she's like, sometimes she's like, I don't really know. Other times, but I also think it is a little bit like, I think it comes down to like Mexicans value time with their family and their loved ones as like the highest priority, much higher than a priority of like being on time to some meeting with someone or whatever. So maybe if you spend 30 more minutes with your kid and you got to blow off and you're like, that guy won't care because I'll show up because we're in Mexico and we all know this is how it works. That's the thing. Everybody knows how it works. So it only seems weird to like some gringo that just shows up and thinks that the cable guy is going to be there at 10 when he says 10. It doesn't mean that at all. Yeah. But like here it's kind of like accepted because like everybody knows that's just the way it is. So no one's really even upset when people show up late unless they're like a foreigner and we're not used to that because it's just 10 a.m. Like everyone knows that doesn't mean 10 a.m. The person saying it knows it. The person who has the person coming knows it. Everybody knows it. So no one really gets extra frustrated about it, except for us gringos.
I'm still getting annoyed. I'm getting better by all means. And,
we just got to get to a zen place about it. And just...
we went to do our family photos recently and we basically left the house when we were supposed to be there. And my mother was like super freaking out. Like, we're going to be late. And I'm like, I know, I hate this. We got 2 kids and a whole group of us to bundle everyone together and get them all ready. Sure. And I'm like, it'll be okay. It'll be okay. It'll be okay. So we showed up completely late, but they were more late. The photographer was more late than we were. So it ended up
probably
being
sweating and sweating on the way there. Like, oh my God, we're not going to make it. And yeah.
Exactly.
Never worry about that in a Latin American country.
And I do think that your insights on the priority levels are very different, that they do want to spend more time with family. It's also just so funny because I have often heard Panamanians, and I'll speak more to Panamanians than I will Mexicans, but Panamanians say, oh, the rest of Panamanians are always late and they always behave like this, but I'm different. I am special. I am always on time, always. They're the worst, actually. They're more late than everybody else. But I swear to God, in their own minds, they really think like they're very punctual and they're really responsible. They get all of this type of stuff done. And everybody don't send me hate mail here. I actually love my time here in Panama and I love Latino culture and music and food and everything. And I understand it's just a piece of it and it doesn't speak to every single person in the world who lives down here. But it is something that if you are thinking about moving to Latin America, to know and understand.
For sure. Yep.
Okay, Marc. So in this conversation, you really painted us a clear picture, right all the way from the beginning of starting your libertarian journey to moving into podcasting as a career, to your love of travel and where that came from and visiting Mexico and the romance of meeting your wife, and to immigration in the US and immigration in Mexico and all the challenges you faced with the languages and everything that's happened with the bureaucracy. I guess kind of my final question for you is, has it been worth it? Has doing all of these extra steps and becoming an expat and all the hassles and all the extra work and paperwork and time wasted in all of this, has it been worth it?
Well, the overall journey, no doubt about it. I mean, absolutely. We had a lot of conversations and decisions like, should we try to get a green card? Should we not? Because there's a lot of cons potentially and a lot of pros as well. Like, I saved a lot of money because my wife was a green card holder now instead of just a person, and my wife who's a green card holder, that cut my taxable income in half. So there's definitely short-term benefits as well. But at the end of the day, I have a family, an amazing family, and all these steps that we've gone through have all been a factor in bringing the three of us together, and I'm so eternally grateful for it. That sure, I can look back and say like, oh, maybe we could have done this thing different or this thing different. There's actually a number of things we probably could have done different because we're just figuring this out as we go, and maybe didn't get all the best advice on the way. But in terms of just the overall journey, of course, it's worth it. I mean, I would do it if it was 100 times harder, no doubt about it, because I'm in so much of a better place now, not just because of the expat aspect of it, although that is a big part of it, because I think just being in another country it gives you a different perspective, and it gives you just a different way to look at the world and a way to look at life. And it can open your mind to new ways of thinking that you would never have if you just stayed in the same place. So yeah, it's absolutely worth it. There's definitely a number of things. Who knows, maybe in 5 years, we might look back and say, okay, we maybe should have done this legal thing different, or maybe timed this differently. I don't know. But again, at the end of the day, immigration stuff is a series of bad options, because the easy option should just be it's instant, at least through marriage. Like, I'm not trying to get into an open borders, closed borders debate, but if it's your family, your wife and your son, like there should be barely any paperwork as far as I'm concerned. I mean, at least you shouldn't have to do what we've been doing. And we're textbook the best case. So there's nothing complicated about our scenario, like whatever, like our marriage is very clear and valid and all this stuff. And it's still it was just a really long time, and is still taking a long time with my stepson's immigration. So, it's a tremendous amount. Like, anyone that gets into a relationship overseas should know what they're getting into, ahead of time. But I wouldn't change anything in terms of like, pursuing it and pursuing, everything we've done along the way, regardless of like what details we might have changed. But at the end of the day, it's all about just bringing our family together and, having the freedom to go wherever we want. That's the thing. So we want all of us to have all the papers that let us go wherever we might choose, so we can decide tomorrow we're going to go to this place, and we don't have to worry, oh wait, one of us can't, or one, so that's really what it's been all about. So that's why my wife's got a green card, I'm getting Mexican residency, my stepson's going to have both those things pretty soon. So, and then, because even just having different passports, different residencies can change, what country you can go into, and the visa process is there. So when all three of us have both, we might say, all right, we're going to go to this country, and okay, today we're going to use our Mexican residencies and passports because this is going to be better here. Oh, this time we're going to use a U.S. one because it's a better thing here. So it's just going to give us so much more freedom. So yeah, it's definitely worth pursuing overall. As much as I wish it didn't need to be pursued in this way, going through all these bureaucracies. Yes, I would change all that. I would change the system existing, but it does. So for me, it's completely worth it, and I would do it 1,000 times over to be where I am right now.
Brilliant. Marc, I love it. An absolute joy to have you on the show today. I have been waiting for this episode for so long. I've invited you on so many times, and you're like, no, not right yet. Not now. Next time.
Well, you're partially responsible too, because you definitely planted, I wouldn't say seeds. You planted like whole trees of expat ideas in me. And obviously since we first connected, I've been a big fan of your show. And it's definitely been, I think listening to the Expat Money Show, not to just do a commercial for you on your own show here, but it really has helped me take like the theoretical and put it into like the action, and then just hearing all these stories of people, like you realize, okay, none of these are superheroes. They're just people like me who kind of put themselves on another journey. And yeah, it's just been an absolutely tremendous resource in terms of everywhere I've gotten as well.
Thank you very much, Marc. I really appreciate that. And if my listeners, they want to check out Lions of Liberty with your beautiful background there, where can we send them?
Well, you can find everything at lionsofliberty.com, or search Lions of Liberty on your favorite podcatcher. We're also on YouTube for now. You can also find our mirror page on Odyssey as well. We will never be taken down from there, because sometimes we talk about controversial things. And YouTube doesn't always like that. So one podcast I didn't get to mention, I also host another podcast in the non-political realm called the Second Print Comics Podcast. So if there are any comic book fans listening, or just nerdy sci-fi type of people, I think you might really enjoy that show as well. So you can find that at secondprintcomics.com. That's the word second spelled out. So yeah, check that out. If you enjoy listening to me to talk about this stuff and you like comics, you might enjoy hearing me talk about that stuff too. Who knows?
Well, I have not had a chance to listen to Second Print Comics. I should, for sure. But I have listened to probably 100 episodes of Lions of Liberty, and had listened to so many amazing guests on your show. And actually, I like your show so much because it is not stuffy by any means. Like, I've heard episodes where you guys are like getting drunk in the living room talking about liberty and stuff. Absolutely. And I'm like pissing myself laughing to these conversations. And I'm like, that's actually going to make this more interesting for me to listen to politics, because politics is not something that I am super passionate about by any means. I'm not even American myself, so following a lot of US politics is not at the top of my radar. But listening to your show gives it a completely different perspective, and I start to learn a lot of the different players involved and different perspective, different ideas, which is what I am really into, is trying to understand people and different perspectives. So I'm a big fan of your work. Make sure you go and check it out at Lions of Liberty. And Marc, thank you so much for being a guest on the show, and I will talk to you soon.
Thanks a lot, Miguel. Appreciate it.